1960s were the golden age of horsepower wars in America. Chevrolet, Chrysler, and Ford weren't just building cars, they were building reputations. The battleground wasn't marketing campaigns or glossy advertisements. It was racetracks, drag strips, and the streets. And at the heart of this war was one simple truth: the engine made the legend. In 1964, Chrysler detonated a bomb on the racing world, the 426 Hemi. This was no ordinary V8. With hemispherical combustion chambers and monstrous breathing capability, it instantly redefined what stock car meant. The Hemi roared to life at Daytona, destroying Ford's hopes and embarrassing them in front of millions of fans. Chrysler wasn't just winning races, it was owning the narrative. The Hemi became a household name overnight. Ford executives were furious. The company had invested heavily in motorsports, seeing racing as a way to market their new muscle cars like the Fairlane and Galaxy. But the Hemi made Ford look slow, outdated, and vulnerable. They needed revenge, and fast. In Dearborn, Michigan, Ford's engineers were called into emergency meetings. The mission was clear: build an engine that could not only match Chrysler's Hemi, but crush it. They started with the 427 cubic inch FE block, a proven warrior that had already won at Le Mans and in drag racing. But engineers knew that simply modifying the FE wasn't enough. To defeat the Hemi, they needed to outthink it. The solution was radical for Detroit. Instead of sticking with pushrod technology, Ford engineers developed a single overhead camshaft design for each cylinder bank. It was exotic, high-revving, and unlike anything else in American stock car racing. The new cylinder heads gave it hemispherical combustion chambers similar to Chrysler's Hemi, but with the added advantage of revving higher and breathing more efficiently. By late 1964, the engine was born: the Ford 427 SOHC Cammer. It was a monster, not just another V8, but a declaration of war. The Ford Cammer was a feat of engineering brilliance, the kind of engine that made even seasoned mechanics stop and stare. Its architecture was based on the FE 427, but the new heads transformed it into something extraordinary. At its core was a 7.0-liter displacement, 427 cubic inches of pure American muscle. But what set it apart was the overhead cam design. Each bank of cylinders had a single camshaft, eliminating the clunky push rods that limited RPMs in traditional V8s. Instead, lightweight valve train components allowed the cammer to scream at high revs, unlocking horsepower that pushrod rivals couldn't touch. The valve train was driven by a giant 6-foot-long timing chain housed in a cast aluminum case at the front of the engine. Mechanics joked that the chain looked like it belonged in a motorcycle more than a car. It was both ingenious and problematic. Under heavy use, the chain could stretch, throwing off valve timing. Racers often added tensioners or replaced chains frequently just to keep the beast under control. But the payoff was staggering. In factory trim, the Cammer produced 616 horsepower at 7,000 RPM with a single 4-barrel carburetor. With dual quads, it climbed to 657 horsepower at 7,500 RPM. These were insane numbers for the mid-1960s, especially compared to Chrysler's 426 Hemi, which was rated closer to 425 to 500 horsepower in racing spec. The Cammer wasn't just competitive, it was a predator, and that was just the beginning. Drag racers quickly discovered that with modifications, bigger carburetors, wilder cam profiles, superchargers, the Cammer could easily push past 700, 800, even 1,000 horsepower. On nitromethane and top fuel trim, it could break 1,500 horsepower. This wasn't just an engine, it was an engineering masterpiece. Visually, the Cammer was just as intimidating. The massive timing cover, the towering intake manifold, the wide heads, it looked like a racing engine disguised as a street motor. Hot rodders nicknamed it the Cammer, not just for its design, but because it had an aura of menace. Ford had built not just a response to the Hemi, but something Chrysler engineers privately admitted they feared. With the Cammer ready, Ford prepared for war. The plan was simple: put this engine in their Galaxies and Fairlanes, unleash it at Daytona, and reclaim dominance. But the battle never happened. Before the Cammer could hit the track, NASCAR President Bill France dropped the hammer. He announced that the 427 SOHC was ineligible for competition. His reasoning: the engine was not a true production motor. NASCAR's rulebook required that engines used on the track had to be available in cars sold to the public. Ford had no plans to put the Cammer into street cars. It was designed for one purpose: racing. To France, that made it an unfair weapon. But to Ford, the decision reeked of politics. After all, Chrysler's Hemi had been allowed to race under similar conditions. Why was the Cammer singled out? Many historians argue that the real reason was fear. The Cammer was simply too good. If Ford had been allowed to run it, they might have dominated NASCAR for years, leaving Chrysler and Chevrolet in the dust. The fallout was ugly. Ford accused NASCAR of favoritism. Some executives even considered considered pulling out of the sport entirely. For a brief period, Ford boycotted major races, refusing to bring their cars to the track. The standoff was a major moment in NASCAR history, one that highlighted the constant tension between innovation and regulation. In the end, the Camry never turned a competitive lap in NASCAR. It was outlawed before it even got the chance. And just like that, Ford's ultimate weapon became a legend of what if. If NASCAR didn't want the Camry, other forms of racing welcomed it with open arms. Almost immediately, drag racers saw its potential. In the NHRA, the engine became a weapon of choice for some of the biggest names in the sport. Connie Kalitta, nicknamed the Bounty Hunter, stuffed the Camry into his dragsters and tore down quarter-mile tracks with ferocity. Don Prudhomme, the Snake, also used the Camry in the early days, making it a staple of the fuel dragster wars. With superchargers and nitromethane, the engine's output skyrocketed past 1,500 horsepower, making it one of the most feared engines in drag racing history. The Camry wasn't just powerful, it was adaptable. Racers experimented with fuel injection, exotic carb setups, and different cam profiles. The engine proved itself as both a naturally aspirated monster and a forced induction beast. In drag racing, where outright power mattered more than reliability, the Camry found its true calling. Beyond drag racing, the Camry appeared in land speed record attempts and experimental builds. Hot rodders dreamed of putting it into street cars, though few could afford it. Ford offered it as a crate engine through their racing catalog, meaning technically anyone with enough cash could buy one. But at around $2,300 in the 1960s, equivalent to nearly $20,000 today, it was a luxury few could justify. For those who did, the reward was unmatched bragging rights. Imagine popping the hood of your hot rod and revealing a 427 SOHC Camry with its massive timing cover and wide heads dominating the engine bay. Even among muscle car royalty, the Camry was an exotic. It never had the chance to shine in NASCAR, but in drag racing and car culture, it became a legend. Today, the Ford 427 SOHC Camry stands as one of the greatest what could have been stories in motorsport. It was an engine too good for its own time, killed not by flaws but by fear. Collectors today treat surviving Camrys as holy relics. Prices for original engines can easily exceed six figures. Reproduction parts and complete new builds are available, keeping the legend alive for hot rodders and racers who want to taste forbidden fruit. The Camry also remains a symbol of engineering ambition. It represents a moment in history when Detroit was willing to take risks, when corporate pride fueled innovation, and when horsepower wars pushed technology to the edge. The Camry proved that American V8s didn't have to rely on brute force alone. They could be as advanced as anything in Europe. And perhaps most importantly, it stands as a cautionary tale. NASCAR's bans show that racing is never just about speed. It's about politics, balance, and the constant push and pull between innovation and fairness. The Camry wasn't banned because it was weak. It was banned because it threatened to upset the entire ecosystem of stock car racing. Fans still wonder, what if? What if Ford had been allowed to run the Camry at Daytona? Would the Hemi have been dethroned? Would NASCAR's history look completely different? We'll never know. But maybe that mystery is what makes the Camry so enduring. In the end, the Ford 427 SOHC wasn't just an engine. It was a statement, a shot across the bow that scared rivals, shook NASCAR, and carved its name into racing history. The Camry never got to prove itself on the high banks, but its legacy lives on, bigger, louder, and more legendary than ever. It remains quite simply the greatest engine NASCAR never allowed to race.